The rain was coming down hard that Thursday afternoon, each drop hitting my window like tiny stones. I sat in my living room staring at the same book I'd been trying to read for weeks. The words just wouldn't stick anymore. Nothing seemed to stick these days. Then my phone buzzed. It danced across the smooth surface of my old mahogany table, the one piece of furniture I'd fought to keep when everything else got divided up. I almost didn't look at it. Most calls these days were from telemarketers or my sister checking up on me with that worried voice she'd been using since the divorce. But something made me glance over David. My heart did a little skip. Not the good kind, the confused, panicked kind. David was Mark's best friend, had been since they were 5 years old, building sandcastles and getting into trouble. He was the quiet one who stood next to Mark at our wedding. The one who always brought potato salad to our barbecues. It's the one who never said much but somehow always seemed to be watching. Why would David be calling me? We hadn't talked really. Talked since the lawyers finished their paperwork 6 months ago. Sure, we'd nodded at each other once in the grocery store. He'd been buying milk, I'd been buying wine. We'd done that awkward dance where you both pretend you didn't see each other, then realize you have to say something, then wish you hadn't. But a phone call? That was different. That was ... intentional. I let it ring 3 more times while I tried to figure out what this could mean. Maybe something had happened to Mark. Despite everything that went wrong between us, I still cared about him. You don't just stop caring about someone after 20 years, even when they drive you crazy enough to pack up half your life and start over. Or maybe it was something simple. Maybe some mail got delivered to the wrong address. Maybe he needed my new address for something. That had to be it. Taking a deep breath, I picked up the phone and tried to sound normal. "Hello, David." There was a pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end, and for a second I wondered if he was going to hang up. "Sarah. Hi, it's David." His voice sounded different than I remembered. Deeper, maybe? Or maybe I was just used to hearing it mixed in with Mark's louder voice, always competing for airtime. "Is this a bad time?" he asked, and I could hear something in his voice. Nervousness. Uncertainty. "No, it's fine," I said, even though I was twisting the loose thread on my armchair so hard it might snap. "Is everything okay? Is Mark all right?" It seemed like the right question to ask. It's a safe question. The bridge between what we used to be, all of us together, and what we were now. Strangers who used to know each other. "Yeah, Mark's fine," David said quickly. "As far as I know, anyway." But I wasn't calling about Mark. That stopped me. Cold. "I was calling to see how you're doing," he continued. "How you're really doing." I sat there for a moment, not sure what to say. David, the quiet observer, was calling to check on me. Mark hadn't even done that. Our conversations since the split had been all business. Who gets the good dishes? Who pays for the landscaping? Whose name stays on the electric bill? No one had asked me how I was doing. Not like this. "Oh, I managed. I'm doing okay. David, thank you for asking. Still getting used to this place, you know?" The lie felt paper thin. Okay, didn't come close to describing what it felt like to rebuild your entire life at 52. K didn't cover waking up in a house that felt too big and too quiet. K or eating dinner for one every night. Or realizing that most of your friends had been Mark's friends first. "That's good," he said, but something in his tone told me he didn't believe it. Maybe because he'd been there. He'd seen Mark and me together for years, watched us slowly fall apart without even realizing it was happening. "Listen, Sarah," he said, and I could hear him take a breath. "This might sound strange, and please feel free to say no. No pressure at all. But I was wondering, would you maybe want to get coffee sometime, just to talk? Properly, I mean." Mine started racing. Coffee with David. What would we even talk about? The weather? The old days that didn't feel so good anymore? How weird it was that he was Mark's best friend, and here he was calling me. But there was another part of me, the part that had been rattling around this quiet house for months. The part that missed having real conversations with real people, that was curious. Maybe even a little excited. David had always been the listener. In our group, while Mark told stories and made everyone laugh, David sat back and watched. He noticed things. He remembered details. What had he noticed about me? About us? About the way things fell apart. Coffee, I repeated, buying myself time. To think the rain was still drumming on the roof, steady and hypnotic. I know it might seem weird, he said gently, given everything. And if you're not comfortable with it, I totally understand. But honestly, I just thought it might be nice to connect. You were a big part of my life too, Sarah, for a long time. It feels strange to just cut off completely. He was right. He'd been there for everything. Backyard barbecues, holiday parties, birthday celebrations, graduations. He wasn't just Mark's friend. He'd been part of our life, part of our family in a way. His quiet presence had been a constant, and maybe I'd never really appreciated it before. Maybe Mark's loud personality had drowned out everything else. Where were you thinking? I asked, surprising myself. There's a little coffee shop called the Daily Grind on Maple Street, he suggested. It's usually pretty quiet in the afternoons. We could just sit and talk. No agenda, no pressure. Maple Street. I knew that area. It was neutral territory. Not too close to my new place or the old neighborhood where Mark still lived. Quiet, he'd said. Safe. What could it hurt, really? Cup of coffee? A conversation? Maybe it would give me some kind of closure. Or maybe, and this thought surprised me, maybe it would be the beginning of something new. Not romantic, nothing like that. The thought hadn't even crossed my mind that way. But connection. Human connection. Something I hadn't realized how. Much I'd been missing until I heard his kind voice on the phone. Okay, David, I said, feeling something settle in my chest. Not anxiety, which surprised me. More like possibility. Coffee sounds nice. Really, he sounded relieved. How about Saturday afternoon? Round 2. Saturday at 2 sounds perfect. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, holding the phone and listening to the rain. What had I just agreed to? And why did it feel like the first interesting thing that had happened to me in months? The bell above the door of the Daily Grind made a cheerful sound as I pushed inside, shaking the rain off my umbrella. The place smelled like coffee beans and fresh bread, warm and welcoming after the gray cold outside. David had been right. It was quiet. A couple of college students sat in the corner with their laptops, and an older woman was reading a book by the window. But otherwise, the place was peaceful. I spotted him right away, sitting at a small table in the back corner. He had a mug in front of him and was looking toward the door like he'd been watching for me. He looked different somehow, not like Mark's sidekick or shadow, or like himself. He was wearing a simple gray sweater, and his dark hair was a little damp from the rain. There were more silver streaks at his temples than I remembered, but they looked good on him. When he saw me, he smiled. Not the big, wide grin that Mark always wore, the one that sometimes felt like he was performing. This was smaller, gentler, real. Sarah, he said, standing up as I approached. It felt formal, but polite. Thanks for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Well, you got me curious, I admitted, sliding into the chair across from him. And I needed to get out of the house anyway. He waved to the barista, and soon I had a steaming latte in front of me. The warmth felt good in my hands. For a few minutes, we just sat there. It wasn't completely comfortable, but it wasn't terrible either. It felt like we were both trying to figure out how to do this, how to be David and Sarah instead of Mark's friend and Mark's ex-wife. So he said finally, running his finger around the rim of his mug, "How are you really doing, Sarah?" He looked right at me when he asked, and his eyes were steady and kind. There was no judgment there, no pity, just genuine curiosity. And somehow, faced with that simple, honest question, all my usual answers felt fake. I'm fine, and I'm doing well, and it's an adjustment. They all felt like lies. It's been harder than I expected, I said, looking down at my coffee. The quiet takes some getting used to. After 20 years of... I trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. After 20 years of what? Noise? Arguments? Mark's voice filling every silence. After 20 years of sharing your life with someone, David finished gently. Yeah. I looked up at him. Exactly. I imagine it would be, he said. Even when it's the right decision, it's still a loss. It's the way he said it. So matter of fact. So understanding made something tight in my chest loosen a little. Mark doesn't see it that way, I said before I could stop myself. He acts like this is all just a minor inconvenience. Like we're just ... reorganizing. David was quiet for a moment, considering. Mark's always been good at pushing forward, he said carefully. Sometimes I think he does it because if he stops to really think about things, it might hurt too much. I stared at him. In all the years I'd known David, I'd never heard him analyze Mark like that. Never heard him see past the surface to what might be underneath. You notice a lot, don't you? I said. He shrugged, looking a little embarrassed. It's occupational hazard of being the quiet one, I guess. What did you notice about us? I asked, then immediately regretted it. Sorry, that's probably not fair to ask. No, it's okay, he said. He was quiet for a long moment, thinking. I noticed that you stopped laughing at his jokes about 2 years ago. I noticed that you started bringing a book to parties. I noticed that you two stopped looking at each other when you talked. Each observation hit like a small punch to the stomach because they were all true. I noticed that you looked tired, he continued softly, and I noticed that Mark didn't seem to notice. Felt tears prick at my eyes and blinked them back. Why didn't you say anything? What would I have said? And who would I have said it to? He spread his hands. You two had to figure it out yourselves. We sat in silence for a while. The coffee shop hummed quietly around us. The espresso machine. Hissing, quiet conversations. The sound of rain against the windows. Can I ask you something? I said finally. Of course. Apu! Why did you call me? Really? David looked down at his hands, then back up at me. Because I missed you, he said simply. Because for 20 years, you were part of my life too. And when you and Mark split up, I felt like I lost a friend, and I didn't know if I was allowed to do anything about it. Oh, I hadn't expected that level of honesty. And because, he continued, I kept thinking about how you used to ask me about my job. And remember things I'd told you and make sure I had enough to eat at parties. You saw me, Sarah, not just as Mark's friend, but as me. And I realized I never got to tell you that I saw you too. Something warm spread through my chest, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I did see you, I said. I always wondered what you were thinking about, watching all of us. Mostly I was thinking that people are fascinating, he said with a small smile, and that most of them don't pay attention to each other nearly enough. And what were you thinking about me? He met my eyes. I was thinking that you deserved better than being taken for granted. The words hung in the air between us, honest and kind and more direct than anything anyone had said to me in months. Thank you, I whispered. For what? For seeing me. For calling for this. I gestured to the coffee shop, to the space between us, to whatever this was becoming. Thank you for saying yes, he said. I was terrified you'd hang up on me. I laughed and it felt good. I almost did. But I'm glad I didn't. Me too. We talked for 2 more hours. About books, about work, about what it felt like to start over in your 50s. About travel and dreams and fears and all the things you don't usually talk about with your ex-husband's best friend. When I finally got home, the house didn't feel quite so quiet anymore. And for the first time in months, I was looking forward to tomorrow. Noise, I didn't say Mark's name, but we both knew who the noise was. I can't imagine. He said softly, Mark. He fills a room, always has he said it, without malice, a simple statement of fact. He does, Eo agreed. And when that presence is exceedingly gone, the silence. Is loud I hadn't meant to be so honest boot something about David's calm demeanor? Made it easy he wasn't trying to fix anything or offer unsolicited advice. Hugh was just listening. I worried about that had admitted surprising me again about how you do handle. The quiet you always seem as centered amidst the chaos centered me. I almost laughed idleways, felt like I was desperate teletrading water trying to maintain equilibrium while Mark generated wave stats. Kind of you to say David butt-centered isn't exactly. The word I'd use hyperpotually bracing might be more accurate. He chuckled a low, warm sound, Mabe. But you held things together. Always admired that. Admiration from David, it was a strange, unsettling yet entirely unpleasant feeling wetted for a while. Longer skirting Durand. The specifics of the divorce side self focusing instead on the aftermath practicalities. The emotional Akosh asked about my plans, my tentative steps towards figuring out what Cereza's individual looked like after decades off. Being Sarah Mark's wife, I found myself telling him about the gardening. I was attempting the art class. I was considering the awkwardness of navigating social events alone, who listened intently, asking gentle questions. Sharing small relevant anecdotes from his own life, his work as an architect, his quiet satisfaction in designing spaces that felt balanced and commit, struck me how different this conversation was from any I'd ever really had when Mark was around. With Mark, conversations were performance-esque gauchange. Often competitions with David, it felt like sharing a quiet exchange grounded in a shared history but focused on the present. There was no tension in the way it expected, no accusations, no need to take sides. The tension was more subtle. An undercurrent of awareness. We were Mark's ex-wife and Mark's best friend, sitting in a quiet cave finding an unexpected ease in each other's company. It felt slightly forbidden, yet utterly harmless. He wasn't flirting. I wasn't looking for that. It was simply human to people navigating complexities of life, finding a moment of quiet understanding as the afternoon wore on. Rain outside softened to a drizzle, told me about a project he was working on, designing a small community library. And his face lit up with a quiet passion I'd never seen before. He talked about the importance of natural light off, creating spaces where people felt comfortable just being, and I realized I felt comfortable just being right here talking to him. It was the most unexpected feeling of all. The conversation flowed more easily, no meandering, through lighter topics, books we'd read, old movies. We both surprisingly enjoyed the absurdities of local politics. We discovered a shared love for old jazz standards, something Mark had always dismissed as elevator music. David mentioned seeing a documentary about Ella Fitzgerald, and I found myself describing the worn vinyl copy of Ella Fitzgerald Sings the Cole Porter songbook that my father used to play on Sunday mornings. It was a memory I hadn't revisited in years, precious and bittersweet. David listened, his head tilted slightly, his expression open and receptive. My dad was the same with Louise Armstrong. He shared his drum pot, could fill the whole house, drove me mom crazy, but I loved it. We smiled at shared nostalgia. A small bridge built across the years, independent of Mark. It was in these shared moments, these small revelations, that the real connection began to deepen. It wasn't about rehashing the past with Mark, but discovering a surprising amount of common ground with David himself, layerside. Never noticed when he stood in Mark's shadow. There was a moment when the barista brought refills and David instinctively pushed the sugar dispenser to me, remembering I took 2 sugars, just like I always had it. Wasak. A small gesture, insignificant tree, but it landed with surprising weight. Mark, even after 20 years. Rural, I remembered things like that unless prompted. David, the quiet observer, had remembered it, spoke volumes about his attentiveness, his quiet way of carrying that I'd completely avert. You remembered, I murmured, more to myself than to him. He gave a slight shrug, a faint blush creeping upus. Next, something stick. We lingered, letting the conversation ebb and flow naturally. He asked about my kids, genuinely interested in their lives beyond the updates Mark might have provided. I spoke about my daughter's struggles, finding her footing in a camative job market, and my son's adventures teaching English abroad. David shared a story about his own niece starting college, the mix of pride and anxiety he felt for her. It felt normal, like talking to an old friend. Except, you went, not really, or perhaps he was just in a different way than I'd ever categorized him. The tension I felt now wasn't about impropriety, but about the unexpectedness of it all. This deep sense of being seen, of being understood by Simeon, I had subconsciously relegated the background of my own life for so long. It made me question my own perceptions, my own blindness over thy years. Had I been so caught up in the whirlwind of Mark that I'd missed thy quiet depth of his best friend? You know, Sarah? David said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more serious. I always felt bad. I looked at him, puzzled. Bad about what? He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. About how things were sometimes with Mark. Hadn't elaborate, didn't need to. He'd been there. He'd seen the impatience, the casual dismissals, the way Mark's needs often overshadowed everyone else's. He'd seen my quiet accommodations, my efforts to smooth things over. You don't need to feel bad, David, I said softly. It wasn't your marriage, I know, he acknowledged, but friendship. Sometimes it feels like you should step in, say something, and rarely did. It felt complicated, like crossing a line. It was complicated, I agreed, appreciating his honesty. It was a vulnerability I hadn't expected, a shared acknowledgement of the difficulties that Mark himself never seemed capable of recognizing. You were in a tough spot, Mabe, he conceded, but I just wanted you to know. I saw you, Sarah. I saw how strong you were, even when it seemed like no one else did it. His words landed gently, but with the force of a revelation. Simeon had seen, someone had understood Yvonne in silence. It wasn't pity in his voice, but respect, genuine respect. A wave of emotion washed over me. Relief, gratitude. A strange sort of validation that came from the most unexpected source. Tears pricked the back of my eye sand. I quickly blinked them away, focusing in the swirling pattern in my latify foam. Thank you, David, I whispered, my voice thick. That means a lot. The atmosphere in the small cave seemed to hung with unspoken understanding. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't scandalous. It was profoundly, surprisingly, deeply human, a connection forged not in spite of the past, but perhaps because of it, built on quiet observation, mutual respect, and startling realization that sometimes the people you least expect are the ones who truly see you. We eventually fell silent again, but this time it was a comfortable sense, filled with the weight of shared understanding rather than awkwardness. Afternoon light had faded, the streetlights outside casting a warm glow through the Rain Street window, the Kiowas emptying out. It felt like a natural end point. Well, I said, gwang my purse. Thank you for the coffee, David, and fourth conversation. It was surprise English. It was, he agreed, smiling the gentle smile again. Really nice. I'm glad we did this. Sarah, he walked me to the door, holding it open as Jan furled my umbrella. The rain had stopped, leaving the air smelling fresh and clean. Listen, he said, pausing on the sidewalk. No pressure again. Dutif, you ever wanted to do this again, Justuk? I'd like that. My first instinct might have been caution, a reflexive withdrawal. Learned from years of navigating Mark's by Venus and the complexities off social circles, but the honesty and genuine respect I'd felt over the past couple of hours pushed back against that instinct. This wasn't about Mark. This wasn't about betraying any loyalties. It felt separate, something nascent, and grounded in mutual regard. It felt like friendship, a different kin perhaps, but friendship nonetheless. I'd like that too, David, I replied, meeting his gaze. Thank you. He nodded, looking relieved. Take care getting home. You too. I turned and walked down Maple Street. The damp pavement, reflecting the street lights like scattered jewels, missteps, felt lighter than they had. In months, nothing overtly dramatic had happened. There were no shocking confessions, no scandalous proposals. They won't believe what happened. Wasn't about some explosive event, but about the quiet internal shift, the unexpected scory of connection, and understanding in the unlikeliest off places with my ex-husband's best friend. What happened was that I felt seen, truly seen perhaps for the first time in Avery long. Time. David hadn't tried to fix me, console me in a pitying way, or draw me into any drama regarding Mark. He had simply offered his time, his attention, and his respect. He had validated my experiences without needing to condemn us. Friend acknowledging the complexities of it all. That conversation was turning point, not in a way that suggested a new romance that wasn't on the table for either of us. I sensed, and it wasn't what why needed or wanted. The revelation was simpler, yet more profound. It was the realization that my life wasn't just the sum of my years with Mark. It was the discovery that connections can be forgotten, unexpected ways that people can surprise you, and that quiet strength and gentle observation often hold more volume than loud pronouncements. It made me look back at my marriage, not with bitterness, but with a clearer perspective. I saw the patterns, my own role in them, and Mark's limitations, spurps, with more compassion than before. But more importantly, it made me look forward. The loneliness that had clung to home like the damp air felt less oppressive. The future seemed less like a vast empty space and more like a landscape waiting to be explored. Talking with David had reminded me of my own worth, reflected back at me through his quiet respect. It showed me that kindness and understanding could exist where least expected them. We did have cafe gig and a kuzli. Sometimes we talk about books or music, sometimes about the challenges of navigating life post-divorce, sometimes just about the weather. It remains simple, uncomplicated. In that initial surprise and Kafturn, it wasn't a replacement for life I'd lost, but a quiet affirmation that new connections built in honesty and mutual respect where a possibility was a reminder that even after the noise fades, there can be meaning and worth in the quiet conversations, in being truly heard, and in seeing yourself reflected kindly in someone else's eyes. And that, I think, is something worth believing.